Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. Madam Secretary, please take the roll.
Assemblywoman Anderson. Present. Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod. Here. Assemblywoman Brown May. Here. Assemblywoman Considine. Present. Assemblyman DeLong. Present. Assemblywoman Duran. Here. Assemblyman Gurr. Here. Assemblywoman Hanson. Here. Assemblywoman LaRue Hatch. Here. Assemblyman Watts. Here. Assemblyman Urick. Chair Cohen.
Thank you, and I am present. Before we get started, we're going to go through some housekeeping. We are going to take the agenda in order, with one exception of doing some introductions of a couple of bills. Beyond that, please silence your electronic devices. If you wish to testify, please sign in at the table by the door and provide a business card to the committee secretary. For those joining us online, please be sure to mute your microphone when you're not speaking to minimize any background noise. When testifying, please turn on your microphone and clearly state your name and affiliation, if any, for the record. Then turn the microphone off each time you're done speaking. As for handouts, please provide 15 hard copies for members of the public. Electronic copies should have been submitted to our committee manager by 12 p.m. yesterday for members of the committee. We expect courtesy and respect in our interactions during the meeting, even if we don't agree with each other's positions. Please note, committee members will be using our laptops and other electronic devices to view documents, exhibits, etc. Please don't view this as a sign of disrespect or inattention. So before we get started, we're going to do a couple BDR introductions. So I'm going to introduce BDR number 45-339. And as a note, a vote to introduce a BDR committee does not indicate that you are supporting the BDR, just that you are voting to have a hearing and get the bill, a bill number, that type of thing, but you're not committing to support it for final passage. So with that, I will entertain a motion to introduce BDR number 45-339. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Okay, second. I have a motion from the vice chair and a second from Assembly Member Watts. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Great. Any opposed, say nay. Seeing none, the motion carries. Next, I will introduce BDR 40337. Do I have a motion for introduction of BDR 40-337?
So moved.
Okay, I have a motion from the vice chair. Do I have a second? I have a second from Assembly Member Watts. Do we have any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, any opposed, nay? Okay, the motion carries unanimously. With that, we are going to move on to our agenda, and we're going to move on to a presentation from the Southern Nevada Water Authority. Gentlemen, please go ahead whenever you're ready.
Thank you for the invitation, Chair Cohn, members of the committee. For the record, my name is John Insminger. I'm the General Manager of the Southern Nevada Water Authority. With me today is Andy Belanger, our Director of Public Services. I'll just jump right into the presentation. SNWA has 5 primary missions. We coordinate regional conservation efforts. We do a 50-year water supply plan every single year so that we always have a 5-decade outlook on planning. We treat up to 600 million gallons of water a day to make sure it's safe for human consumption. We build a lot of expensive infrastructure. We've built over $4 billion in new infrastructure in the last 15 years, and now we're responsible for operating it and stewardship. We oversee restoration of the Las Vegas Wash, the Las Vegas Springs Preserve, and the Warm Springs Natural Area. So our natural resources are very important to us. No mystery to anybody from down south that Las Vegas is the driest metropolitan area in the United States, which gives us some unique challenges. We get 90% of our water from the Colorado River. So said another way, 90% of the water for 76% of the state's population every day comes out of Lake Mead. The other 10% is from the native aquifer underlying the Las Vegas Valley. But we're not alone. We got a lot of neighbors. The Colorado River, some call it the hardest working river in the world. Just for comparison's sake, the Colorado gets about 12 million acre feet a year. The Columbia at Klamath is 280 million a year, and the Mississippi at New Orleans is 460 a year. So a very small river, which we have to take care of 40 million Americans, 30 Native American tribes, and 5 million acres of irrigated agriculture. And it's a river that's in trouble. This is the tale of the tape since the turn of the century. Red bars are below average, blue bars are above average. 2002 is still the driest year in recorded history, and 2012, 2013 were the driest back-to-back years in recorded history, right up until 2021 and 2022. And that's had a dramatic impact on the lake that's in our backyard. We went into this century essentially full, and we now sit at less than 30% capacity in the largest reservoir in the country. So what does all this add up to? Well, what it means is there's significant risk. If the lake continues to go down at elevation 950, Hoover Dam stops generating electrical power, and at elevation 895, it becomes physically impossible to pass water through the dam downstream to approximately 25 million Americans in coastal California and central Arizona. So we're working to come to agreement at the end of January. The 6 states submitted modeling assumptions that we wanted reclamation to look at as they look to change the operating guidelines between Lakes Powell and Lake Mead. California submitted their own plan. I would say, and I would stress this to the legislature, lack of unanimity at one step in a multi-year process does not represent failure. We're still working. I was with the governor's reps from California and Arizona on Friday. I'm talking to them again tomorrow morning. There's a lot of areas of commonality between the two proposals, and it's in all of our best interests if we can close those gaps and come up with one 7-state plan. So that's what we're working on right now. Just in terms of process, so you know when things are going to pop into public. The draft environmental impact statement will be public probably end of March, early April, so you'll still be in session when the next round of newspaper articles comes out. That goes from there to a final EIS and a record of decision probably end of July. So what have we been doing about it? I mentioned infrastructure, I mentioned planning, water banking. This is not sneaking up on us. We have banked enough water over the last 20 years that we now have approximately 10 years of our current demands banked in reserves. And conservation, I'll cover a number of those issues. First and foremost, everything we do in conservation has to be focused on reducing outdoor use, because we got the short end of the stick in 1922, right? Nevada has a robust 1.8% of the legal entitlements on the Colorado River, and that's not going to change. But we have some strategic advantages, and one of them is being located upstream of Hoover Dam. Because of that, we can recycle 100% of the water that we use indoors, and we have to focus all of our conservation efforts on reducing our outdoor water footprint. Being upstream of the dam also gives us security that no other state has. We have invested $1.5 billion in all local money, without a dime of state money, without a dime of federal money. We built the third intake and the low lake level pumping station, which gives us the redundancy to be able to guarantee the physical security of our customers, even in the event that we get to that dead pool level where you can't release water downstream to California, Arizona, and Mexico. We can still pump our water. We can still take care of 2.3 million Nevadans. Our other strategic goal is we're relatively homogeneous. And I know that's a kind of crazy thing to say in politics today, but other states are much more balkanized because they have significantly more tribal interest. Arizona has 22 Native American tribes with claims to the Colorado River. Nevada has 1, and the Fort Mojave's rights were fully quantified in the decree in Arizona v. California. They also have large agricultural users, which we don't have. So when I talk of homogeneity, I'm talking about municipal industrial sector and not having to compete within these other sectors like most of the other states are forced to do. We've also been getting ready for this. The 2023 is not the first time we're talking about conservation. We put our first drought plan in place in 2004 and have been leading the world, literally leading the world in innovative, progressive urban water conservation for the last 20 years. And all of that adds up to this. Since 2002, our population is up about 800,000 people, 49%. Our per capita usage is down over half, and our net depletions off the Colorado River are down by 31%. So we are a living, breathing example that you can grow your economy, you can diversify your economy, and you can simultaneously use a lot less water. But we're not done. And I think we have to recognize that this is our natural disaster, right? Nobody ever calls into question earthquake codes in San Francisco or hurricane codes in southern Florida. This is what we're gonna have to deal with, so we're gonna have to keep moving ahead. Just in the last 18 months, we've gotten even more aggressive. I won't go through every single one of these things, but we now have a moratorium that takes effect in September on new buildings using evaporative cooling. We've limited new pool size construction to 600 square feet. All of our golf courses are now on even more stringent budgets, and we're sending a pricing signal to the top 10% of our water users to not hopefully, we don't want to generate the revenue. We want them to change their behavior and get out there, get in their garage, change their watering clock. So I know this might be a little bit hard to see, but basically what this does is quantify every single conservation measure into gallons per capita per day savings and walk us down from where we were to an 86 gallons per capita per day by 2035. And we're already moving quickly in that direction. From 2021, we were at 110. In 2022, we're at 104. So we reduced our use by 6 gallons per person per day in the span of 1 year, just in the last 24 months. Here's just another way of showing that. Anybody who's been to Vegas knows there's still a lot of cranes, still a lot of construction. Valley-wide, we issued 47,000 new connections in the last 3 years. So Durango Station is one connection. Each single-family home is one connection. But in that same time period, having issued all of those new permits, we reduced our water use by 12% in that same 3-year period. So this is just directly from our resource plan, and what it's showing on the right is the red line is our water demands based upon CBER population projections. And what it shows is if we use CBER demands, we have plenty of water through the next 50 years. If we jump those demands up, if we raise even above what CBER is projecting for population once in 2035 and once in 2055, then on the left you see us start to access those banked water resources about 20 years from now. The dark blue is our basic allocation off the Colorado River, and you can see it going down. That's when we're taking those shortages. The blue is a new project that we have with the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. MET is building a $4 billion water recycling project, because right now California discharges most of their effluent into the Pacific Ocean. So the plan is to treat that, distribute it through 4 different groundwater basins, recharge it, and then they can take it out and use it for their customers. In return for us contributing up to $750 million to the capital costs of that project, they will then leave a piece of California's Colorado River entitlement in Lake Mead for our use. So this is my last slide. We are going to be asking the legislature to consider a couple of things. I won't go into too much detail because I don't think it's introduced yet. But generally, we need to continue to limit septic systems in Southern Nevada. If it goes into a septic, we don't treat it, we don't get the return flow credit, it's lost to us forever. We need some slight modifications to AB 356 and some additional conservation enhancements. So I will stop there and see if the committee has any questions.
Thank you for that really informative presentation. I do have a question from Assemblywoman Brown May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Water is fluid. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I've spent a little bit of time, so first I have to say thank you to your entire team, right? I've spent a lot of time over the interim learning about water and water law and water allocation and your conservation efforts. And I think our conservation efforts, particularly in Southern Nevada, are remarkable. So I think it's important we get that on the record. I have a constituent that calls me at least once a month, many times more than that, about water, right? Because it's something visual that we can all see depleting. And you talk about water banked in reserves, but water is fluid. So I'm wondering if you could explain that just a little bit. How do we know we're going to have reserves somewhere? Where is it banked? And something just a little bit more tangible and literal that perhaps I could take back to my constituents to really understand where are we banking water and how are we so sure we're going to have it in 20 years?
Sure. So there's a couple different categories. I'll start with Arizona. So from the mid-90s through about 2010 or so, we were in a partnership with the Arizona Water Banking Authority. They weren't using all their Colorado River water at the time, so we paid them to physically inject that water into their aquifers. And, you know, it's monitored. You say it's fluid, but we know it's confined and the water levels go up. And when the day comes that we want that back, the arrangement is they pump that out, serve their customers, and we take a piece of their water out of Lake Mead. So that's the first kind. The second kind, we did the same thing in the Las Vegas Valley. Starting in the late 80s, we started physically injecting Colorado River water into the aquifer in Las Vegas. And in fact, we injected so much water into that aquifer that in the northwestern parts of the valley, we got to within about 6 feet of the surface and had to stop because we're going to start popping swimming pools, you know, out of the ground if we kept pushing water into the ground there. And then there's what's called ICS, which is intentionally created surplus, which is the mechanism between the 3 lower division states and the federal government that allows you to have unused water that you leave in Lake Mead and then have the right to take it out at a future date. So even with the declared shortage condition last year and this year, Nevada will actually be leaving some of our extra water in Lake Mead, helping bolster elevations, but also having the legal entitlement to take that water back when the day comes.
Follow up, Madam Chair? Thank you. I appreciate that explanation. Thank you. As one follow-up, if we have folks that are currently on septic systems and we're not able to reclaim that water, right, they're drawing off of our aquifer, is that correct? And so we're re-injecting water to restabilize that? Is that part of the water banking that you're talking about?
Well, there's 2 different scenarios. There are people that are on a well and a septic, in which case they really don't have anything to do with us. They're under the jurisdiction of the state engineer and the health district. But if they're taking potable water from one of our retailers, from City of Henderson, Las Vegas Valley Water District, or North Las Vegas, and they're on a septic, then they're putting Colorado River water into that septic system, and we're not getting that return flow credit, and that's the piece that we need to. And it's honestly going to take decades. There's about 19,000 existing septic systems in the Las Vegas Valley, so it's going to take a while to get all those hooked into the sanitary sewer, but we need to begin the process, and we have.
Assemblymember Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and nice to see you again. I kind of nerd out when you start talking about this stuff because it is so important. And you know, as a native, 3rd generation Las Vegas, I remember as a little girl going out and watching the spillways go over, and oh my God, what I wouldn't do to have that problem again. So. Really fascinating. Could you just talk a little bit more about the partnership with California and what that project looks like and where it's going to be? I think that's something that is a good conversation to have with our constituency and like let them know that we are being proactive with California. I know for one, I'm always telling people that we've been reclaiming our water, you know, since the 90s, and we were so ahead of our time. And so I think this is another example of like Nevada really doing the right thing. So if you could just talk about that a little bit more, I'd appreciate it.
Sure, and I should, if we're going to nerd out, we may as well nerd out, right? The partnership between Metropolitan, SNWA, and the Central Arizona Project has been going strong for about 25 years, and this isn't the first project that we've engaged with them on. We built a small reservoir on the All-American Canal called Drop 2 that prevented over-deliveries of water from Mexico, saved the entire system about 8 million acre-feet of water, and in return for that, we each got a little piece of that water. We did a pilot run of the Yuma desalting plant. Those three agencies have partnered to make investments in the country of Mexico for laser leveling fields, lining canals, and have actually gotten a portion of Mexico's treaty entitlement left in Lake Mead for our use. So this wastewater project, they call it Pure Water, is kind of the next generation of that, where they're collecting all the sewage effluent that's currently being discharged in coastal California into the Pacific Ocean, capturing that, treating it to a very high standard, and then building a distribution system, which you can imagine, you're building a distribution system through the heart of Los Angeles, which is why it costs $4 billion to build recharge facilities and recharge that treated water into the ground that they can then use to pump and augment their retail supply systems. And then they're going to be leaving that piece of California's compact entitlement in Lake Mead for our use in return for our investment. And our board, to reiterate, my board has already appropriated $750 million for us to make this investment.
Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation and for everything that you have planned and worked on and done to bring us to this point. I just have a question about the importance of reclaiming this water and how much, there's a slide called Conservation Matters, and it says, that we're at 224,000 acre feet of water usage. How much of that is reclaimed, or what does reclaimed add? To sum it all up, if we don't have that reclaimed water, where are we?
Yeah, so we actually pump out of the lake and deliver to our customers probably close to 500,000 acre feet of water, right? Our system at Lake Mead will actually produce 900 million gallons of treated clean water a day. So it's a big system. So if we don't have those return flows, then you're effectively losing about half of your water supply. Because we're allowed to pump as much water as we want. Our compact entitlement and federal law applies to our consumptive use of that water. So, for example, there generally get floated a few gray water bills each session. All that gray water would be lost to our return flows, and we wouldn't get the credit, wouldn't be able to pump it back out of the lake. It could also cause serious problems with the operation of the solid waste disposal in the sewage system itself, if you start dewatering the sewage system. So it's critical that we capture all the water that's used indoors, treat it, get it down the Las Vegas Wash, where it just happens to be providing world-class habitat for several aquatic and avian species, get it back into the lake, and give it back to our customers.
Do I have any other questions? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a technical question. Where is your return flow measured? At discharge to the pool, or is it in the wash?
There's a USGS gauge in the wash just upstream of Lake Las Vegas.
Can you talk a bit about the Rockies? And it seems like just like 10 years ago, maybe even less, we used to talk about the snowpack on the Rockies. That's not really as important for us anymore, right? We're not really we can't count on that water getting to us anymore when there are good years of snowpack. Is that correct?
Well, the snowpack in the Rockies is still critical. I mean, that's the source, well, most of the source. It's not 100% of it, because there are gaining reaches, across the Colorado River Plateau. But the big parts of the Rocky Mountains in western Colorado and southern Wyoming, that's the source of supply for 90% of southern Nevada. But it is, diminishing. Through the 20th century, average flow on the river was about 15 million acre feet. The average flow over the last 20 years was 12.3, and most of the climate scientists are telling us it'll be 11-ish by mid-century. So we do have to be preparing for a warmer, drier future, but certain continental dynamics are not changing. There's still going to be storms that come across the Pacific. They're still going to hit the Rocky Mountains. There's still going to be precipitation, and it's going to run downhill. So it's not a situation where we're not going to have any water, but it is a situation where those 40 million Americans I talked about and the 5 million acres of irrigated agriculture, every user in every sector is going to have to do what we've done and make significant investments in water efficiency.
Thank you, Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I'm quite impressed with slide 19 in particular, that one right there. The addition of 47,000 new, but decline of 12%. That's quite something. I don't know if that you would have this number handy, but just curious what the average water bill is for a single-family home. Do you have access to that kind of, just to kind of get an idea? And I don't know if, like, before you had all these measures in place, so we could kind of see this is what the water bill looked like with all these conservation measures.
Sure. And if you want to get it into the record, we can certainly supply something in writing, but just to give you a sort of order of magnitude feel, if you're looking at the median of the middle 80% of the retail customers, it's probably $55 a month. But keep in mind, that could be quite a bit lower in January and higher in July, depending upon how people are using the water. So a 12-month average doesn't mean it's 55 every month, but if you add up what they pay over an entire year and divide it by 12, it's about $55.
Can I follow up real quick? And just one last follow-up. Do we have any idea what that looked like before all these conservation efforts were put in?
Well, our rate, at the retail level, our rates have generally been tracking inflation, capped. Before inflation was crazy, because we did, and now I'm kind of switching over to the Las Vegas Valley Water District, because SNWA doesn't have any customers, but the Las Vegas Valley Water District has 70% of the retail customers in southern Nevada. And for the water district, I think in 2017, we did a 3% increase, 18 a 3% increase, and since then, it's tracked CPI, but CPI collared, so that it is never below 1.5% and never above 4.5%. So this year, with inflation where it is, water rates went up 4.5%.
Thank you very much.
Okay, seeing no other questions, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And so we will move on to a presentation by the Truckee Meadows Water Authority. And please go ahead when you're ready.
So just really quickly to set up, Ottumwa was created in 2001 when Sierra Pacific notified the community that it was going to sell its water utility. So the community leaders of Reno and Sparks and Washoe County stepped up and created Ottumwa and purchased the water utility in 2001. And we're governed by a 7-member board of directors from Reno, Sparks, and Washoe County. In 2015, we merged with the Washoe County's water utility because Washoe County had various water utilities kind of on the fringes of the developed areas in the Reno Sparks. And so we merged with them and basically took over their system. We also took over the South Truckee Meadows General Improvement District, which was a very large GID that served several thousand customers in southwest Reno. This slide shows just an overview of the Truckee River system. For us, Ottumwa owns the water in Donner and Independence Lakes, and we use that for our drought supply. And we refer to the water in there as our privately owned stored water, so POSW. You may have heard that as you talk through and have heard about the Truckee River Operating Agreement, or TROA for short. And so the water in those reservoirs we control completely, and we use them for our drought storage. And then you also have the federal reservoirs, so the top 6 feet 1 inch of Lake Tahoe is a reservoir controlled by the Bureau of Reclamation. And then you also have Stampede, Boca, and Prosser reservoirs. So all of those are governed by the Truckee River Operating Agreement, and we use them to make our water supply and provide our drought storage. This next slide just gives you an overview of Tumwa's water resources. The main point here is that Tumwa uses the Truckee River to supply about 80 to 85% of its water supply. And then in a drought and in the summertime when we need water for peaking purposes, we rely on groundwater. We have about 89 groundwater wells in over 9 different hydrographic basins. And so part of that is we really focus on our aquifer storage and recovery program. So that's active recharge, where we're taking treated surface water, injecting it into the ground for future use. And also passive recharge, where we're resting those wells so that the aquifers can be sustainable and allow us to rely on them when a drought comes. And then we also have a Mount Rose water treatment plant that's taking creek water off White's Creek, treating it, and then supplying that to our customers or using that for aquifer storage and recovery. This slide just shows, it puts in context how much water Tumwa consumes from the Truckee River. So in a normal year, Tumwa is only consuming about 3% of the total river supply, and the rest, the lion's share of it, goes to the Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. And it really shows the compromise under TROA, where in normal to above average years, when Tumwa does not need upstream storage, that water spills, and the majority of the water goes down to Pyramid Lake. And then when you run into a drought year, we need to rely more on the Truckee River. We consume a greater percentage of it. It's the same volume, we're just consuming a greater percentage of it, and then we're also relying on our groundwater wells to get us through those droughts. This slide just shows groundwater production. That's the blue line, and that compared to Washoe County population. And you can see over time that through our conservation measures, through metering and such, our customers are using less water. And that's just when you have a drought and you call for conservation, customers cut back 10 to 15%. And then the next year, when it's a normal year, they've cut back and they've gotten through. Their lawn looked the same, or they thought it looked fine. So they don't automatically start using the same amount of water they used prior to the drought. So just over year, as you have drought messaging, metering, and then we also have a tiered rate structure where you pay per unit, you pay higher for using more water. And so all of that's led to a reduced water use. And you can see 2019, 2020 water use compared to 2001, our customers were using about the same amount of water, even though we gained about 100,000 in population over that same time period. So it just shows we're using less water. This slide just shows our drought storage and how rare it is that we use it. We use it when the so-called Florestan rates drop off in the river. So when the Truckee River falls below a certain rate, we have to start releasing our upstream storage reservoirs to meet our customer demand. And this just shows that we don't use it that often. And also in 2015, you can see that we started gaining more upstream storage, and that's based on TROA and the capabilities that it allows us to use water. And then lastly, this is last 40 years, Lake Tahoe Basin snowpack. You can see this year we're in pretty good shape, and with more storms on the way, it'll get better. So we'll end up the year being above normal, or quite a bit above normal. But this slide just shows the boom and bust cycle on the Lake Tahoe Basin and the Truckee River Basin. And that's why we have to rely on our upstream storage, our groundwater, our ASR program to get us through those drought years. So even though we're in fairly good shape, Steph Morris will talk about what Tumwa's doing now to make sure we have, and to make sure we're in a good position 20 years in the future. So I'll turn it over to her.
Thank you. This is a very busy slide, but just because we are fortunate enough to have a good water supply outlook with lots of upstream storage doesn't mean that we aren't planning and looking at climate change. So what this shows is a extreme climate change scenario. We used the highest emission standard, and we had 8 different global circulation models. And so that basically in this time period, that's 680 years. And we took the worst of whatever model it was. And what we can see here, roughly, it's probably hard to see, but I'll call it out, is of that time period, there's only 25 of the 645 years where we had a shortage. The first shortage was in 2069 at a demand of about 100,000 acre feet. So that's good, but that means we still have work to do. And so what it tells us is so far we have done a good job in terms of managing snowpack, but it's likely to change, and we have to look at other ways and strategies to capture that water when it comes maybe as precipitation, not as snow, which acts as kind of a natural reservoir. And we need to explore other conservation measures. So we are continuing to develop and enhance our drought reserves by the ASR, recharging water into the groundwater basin, and then optimizing how we manage our groundwater and surface water supplies, and then integrating that. What we have done in the past that's been really a good strategy, and which we did early on, it's been happening for decades, is water efficiency codes, seasonal watering conservation consultants, obviously tiered rate billing structure, education and outreach, and then water usage review program. When we are in times of drought, we can call for increased conservation, and our customers have been really fantastic about responding, and that's a great tool for us to continue to use. Well, what are we going to do into the future? So let's talk about some of the considerations that the Truckee River has. So unlike the Colorado River system in southern Nevada, in northern Nevada, the Truckee River Operating Agreement, it requires that wastewater that's treated is returned to the river. And so that means it's not a new source of water that we can use to grow. And essentially that means, for example, if we were to do like residential turf removal, that would not create a new source of water. That water, for any water conserved, would just stay in the river. It wouldn't be available for others to use or for us to meet other demands. TUMWA's process for taking water rights and dedicating them, it really helps developers be efficient. And so because developers are required to dedicate the water rights needed to meet their projects, it incentivizes them to build projects that use less water, and we're seeing a lot more of that. In addition to that, for every acre foot of water that's needed for a new development, we add an additional 11% of water rights that we use to store in upstream. So that's our drought supply to continue to meet that demand. And then I want to talk about some future things that are really exciting that we're looking at. So conservation and continued conservation is one strategy. And other strategies that we're looking at with regional partners are reservoir reoperations. So if we see, and we have seen, changes in snowpack and how the runoff occurs, all the reservoir operations are built on rules. And those rules are really developed based on old flood curves, and they haven't been updated. So we're looking with partners like the Bureau of Reclamation at, are there more efficient ways and tools that we can use to more in real time manage those reservoirs so that we don't release a bunch of water and then the storm actually doesn't develop and we can't recoup that water. So that's a really important tool that we're looking at for upstream reservoir operation. And then obviously expanding the aquifer storage and recovery program and groundwater banking. The one that I think is kind of most exciting is it's a regional partnership, and I'll talk about it. It's advanced purified water. In 2016, regulations were passed for A+ water. That's reclaimed water that is for indirect potable reuse. And TUMWA, with all the partners listed down below, have been looking at and researching and doing pilot programs. And we are now in the process of seeking the first A+ permit to do the American Flat project. And the American Flat, we did a demonstration project, and essentially it would create 2,000 acre feet of water, because most water rights require return flow, but there are some, and the water that goes to this particular system is a mixture of water that has no return flow requirements or is groundwater. So it would create a drought-proof source of water, and it's really helpful in this particular instance because that water is discharged to Swan Lake, which has been prone to some flooding, and so it would take water, excess water that's not needed to be discharged to Swan Lake, and we would inject it into the ground after it's treated to A+, and then pull it out and reuse it. And we are sort of embarking on a large public campaign right now to educate people about indirect potable reuse. And we're really looking at a sort of tiered system for getting this permit, meaning we would prove it up in stages. And we've already done that on a small scale, but we would basically treat it to A+, and then inject it in the groundwater and into the groundwater basin and monitor it. And then as time goes on, and that all works out, which we're feeling very confident about, then we would take it into the groundwater basin, and then we would pump it out and use it for irrigation, and we would make sure it's all good then. And then finally, the last step would be to go through the whole process and then put it into our distribution system for treatment and delivery. And then another project that we are exploring, Mr. Zimmerman's going to talk about, is Palomino Farms.
Thanks, Steph. So the Palomino Farms project is a concept right now. So Palomino Valley, Warm Springs Valley, is about 30 miles northeast of Reno, just west of the Pyramid Lake itself. And what we're exploring there is a groundwater basin banking concept, similar to what Mr. Insminger said with the Arizona project. Right now, in that basin, we've looked at, there's probably a 45,000 acre foot hole in that valley just from overpumping. And so that gives us basically a reservoir underground, slightly larger than Boca Reservoir, that we could inject treated surface water into and store it for future drought supply. And so we're exploring that right now. We would be using our POSW, our water out of Donner and Independence, treating that when we don't need to use it for customers or for drought, and storing it for future use in that groundwater bank. And so we're exploring that right now. Another component of this that's more contingent on other parties like Reno and Sparks, who control the Truckee Meadows Water Reclamation Facility, is sending treated effluent out to this current farm, and substituting that treated effluent for the groundwater they're currently using in order to arrest those groundwater wells and improve the aquifer even more. And so that's just one project we're looking at right now. In the future, there could even be an A+ treatment plant out there where we're treating water to A+ standards and then bringing it back into Tumwa service area in Spanish Springs.
And then I just wanted to tell you kind of about an exciting thing we've been working on in the last year and a half, which is because our drought supply is stored in California, largely in upstream reservoirs that are surrounded by U.S. Forest Service land, we're extremely concerned about wildfire and impacts to water quality and sedimentation from wildfires. And we are fortunate enough to not have had that impact our supply, but we've seen our other states in the West have severe impacts to water quality because of wildfires. So we're trying to work with the Forest Service. Tumwa signed a memo of understanding to plan and treat 50,000 acres in the Middle Truckee River watershed where our reservoirs are located, and that's with partners like the Tahoe National Forest, National Forest Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, Nevada Chapter, and the Truckee River Watershed Council. And here's just an example of what we see from other fires. So you can see the pre-burn is on the left, and then you see all the algae on the right. That's largely from sedimentation, increased water temperatures, from wildfire impacts. And it's essentially, the Middle Truckee River watershed is about 315,000 acres, and about 265,000 of those acres are Forest Service land. And so by creating this partnership with the Forest Service and these other entities, we're looking at increasing the pace and scale of fuels reduction projects, and particularly around water reservoirs, the Truckee River, and then in the WUI, the wildlife urban interface, to protect our region. So with that, we're happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your presentation. I have a question from Assemblymember LaRue Hatch. Gotcha.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for your presentation. I would just like a little more clarity on slide 13. You talk about the Truckee River Operating Agreement, and that you cannot use water from permanent conservation to meet future water supply needs. I'm a little confused on if we're reducing our water consumption, why we can't store it in all of these reservoirs that you've talked about for future use, or is the problem is that it's going downriver and it's going to Pyramid Lake, and therefore you have no access to it? So could you just explain what's going on there?
Sure. The Truckee River Operating Agreement is a legally binding agreement that the parties signed, and it essentially dictates how the river is operated. And so generally, there wouldn't be a requirement to return wastewater to the river. But as part of that negotiated deal, which allowed Tumwa to have a lot of upstream storage, a lot more than we had the ability, all the parties agreed that the water, that the water rights that were treated in the wastewater treatment facilities would return to the river. So it's a contractual obligation under TROA that was signed by Congress.
And another piece of that is just the history on the Truckee River Decree. All the water rights that we're accepting for municipal use were once used for irrigation. And so there was a return flow component for irrigation in the Truckee Meadows. So the farmer, used a certain amount of water to irrigate in the Truckee Meadows, and probably 37 to 40% of that returned to the river, and that made up the supply for all downstream users. So that's a component of it too.
Could I follow up? So what you're saying then, if it's returned to the river, where is it going? If we increase our conservation, who is getting this increased water supply?
So it would be any water user downstream who has a right to divert at the time, and then whatever is not used by those water users is going to Pyramid Lake.
My second question has to do with the snowpack. So I know you had a chart on the snowpack, and we can look outside at the snowfall and know that we have a whole lot, and people get very excited that we have that snowpack. But I have heard concerns that with climate change, we tend to get much hotter springs and summers, and so that snowpack melts faster, and we can't contain all of the water that is coming. And so can you just explain some of the challenges with the snowpack?
Sure. So that's why we looked at this kind of extreme climate change scenario, because it has a lot of increased temperatures. And so we were looking at what kind of impact that would have on our system. And then now we're looking at adopting strategies in the future, like the reservoir reoperation, that would help to keep more water in the upstream reservoirs instead of releasing it. In addition to that, the Palomino project, that a large underground storage, which essentially is acting as a reservoir. And the size of Palomino is about 45,000 acre feet, which is the same size as Boca Reservoir. So that, in order to sort of mitigate, because obviously we don't know. We know it's going to change, but we don't know how. Then we're looking at strategies where we could take it, if it comes not in snowpack, but in runoff, and take the consumptive portion of that and restore it for future use.
Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I have questions. I want to follow up a little bit on some of the conservation efforts. I can't quite wrap my head around why we wouldn't want to encourage people to conserve water where we can with regard to ornamental turf watering. And so I think I heard what you said about the agreement in Congress, and so thank you for that explanation. But if we're conserving water and it's then going into eventually Pyramid Lake because we're not using water, who uses the water in Pyramid Lake? Who eventually would have access to that water? And wouldn't conservation be a relatively good idea to start to transition folks to if we're not at an emergency situation currently?
So thank you for the question. So yeah, the water, any water in Pyramid Lake would benefit the downstream fisheries and the Pyramid Lake itself, Pyramid Lake Paiute tribe. It goes back to that the legal issue about conserved water in the Truckee Meadows cannot be used for future growth in the Truckee Meadows. But it also goes to just the physical aspects of conservation being a little bit different in the Truckee Meadows versus Las Vegas. So in the Truckee Meadows, a lot of that outdoor irrigation actually benefits aquifers substantially. So it's as high as 25%. It adds to the aquifers, just helps, and we rely on those aquifers in drought periods. We also looked at how much non-functional turf, how much turf there might be in our service area, and there's probably 8,000 acre feet is what we estimate. Of that, probably 1,200 acre feet would be considered non-functional under the new bill in southern Nevada. And so when you look at how much you might save in acre feet versus how much it would cost, because when you can't use that conserved water for future growth, there's no funding mechanism. And so that would have to be paid by customers' rates. So you would have to increase rates in the Truckee Meadows. You'd also have a revenue loss impact from reduced water usage for outdoor irrigation. And so all those combined just make it a little less of a benefit in the Truckee Meadows.
Thank you for that explanation. So what I hear you saying is that there's a negative impact if we stop the groundwater access for the aquifer.
There would be, because again, that outdoor irrigation does help our aquifers, helps with recharge.
And if I could just add, when we have water, so essentially the Truckee River, when it was adjudicated, it's based on these Florestan rates. And so there's enough water to meet all the water rights that were adjudicated when they're at a certain rate. And when that rate's met, it's helpful for the recharge to occur from irrigation for future times. And when you have demand hardening, so I'll just use an example in the Central Valley in California, there was a big push to take out row crops and grow pistachios and almonds. So when you have that demand hardening, you lose flexibility. And so if there's sufficient water to be able to meet those needs and it has a benefit, and you have that flexibility like we do to call for increased conservation during 2015 when we were able to do that, and our customers responded, that gives us flexibility. If you take out everything and you get very, very tight and it's not necessary, then you would have a lot more water in the river, but it would go to Pyramid Lake, and it wouldn't be available for other users in the region.
Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Under TROA, the discharge from the treatment plant into the river, is that a hard number or is it just all discharge?
So under TROA, it's all discharge. And so when you have, Tum Wharf has a reclaimed water system, so Reno and Sparks both have reclaimed water customers. But in order to send that treated effluent to those customers, Reno and Sparks have to allocate other water rights in stream flow in the river.
Thank you.
It's my turn to nerd out. So that's true, but there are different sources that come into the treatment plant. So groundwater, when we have summer groundwater, that does not have the return flow element. So all of that can be used for customers of treated effluent.
Pardon me. So if there is water that goes through the treatment plant that doesn't have to be discharged, is there a system currently in place to quote-unquote reclaim that and put it into a new location?
Yes, so in the Reno Sparks area, there's about 7,000 acre feet of reclaimed water that is used to supply water for outdoor irrigation.
Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Chair. So much good information, and I don't want to be partial. Not only was their presentation great, your growth model and your conservation numbers are so impressive. And I've been fortunate that I've got to hear some of these presentations as part of Public Lands, and have been completely impressed with the efforts, and also that you highlight there are very big differences in how Northern Nevada, the water supply and the management differs from Southern Nevada. And Nevada's a unique state, and I appreciate the unique approaches to it. You mentioned Swan Lake, which is a part of my district, and I know that has been a huge problem. So I was a little bit excited about you mentioning, was it the Advanced Purified Water Demonstration Project, American Flat? Can you just say a little bit about how that would work? I get you were saying that then we won't have to put as much water into Swan Lake, but if you could tell me how that's working before that discharge.
Sure. Essentially, right now, there are users of that effluent in the summertime. There's a demand for it, but in the wintertime, there's obviously not irrigation demand for that water. And so it gets discharged into Swan Lake. So by having this treatment plant and A-plus facility, we could take that water in those times, and then it would reduce the amount of discharge into Swan Lake. I hope that helps.
And is this on the drawing board, or you're actively doing this right now?
We are actively doing it. There's a lot of permitting, as you can imagine, as the first A-plus. Plus, it's a little over $100 million project, and it's a partnership with the city of Reno. And so we are in design of the facilities right now. We're just under 30% design. Hopefully by summer we'll be at 30%, and we'll continue with permitting and funding for the project.
Thank you for that. Seeing no other questions, I think we will ask you to step back, and I'm sure we will see you again, though. And we will ask the state engineer to come up with his team. So the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources, Division of Water Resources, Adam Sullivan, state engineer and administrator, and deputy administrator. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Thank you, Chair Cohen, members of the committee. Good evening. My name is Adam Sullivan, state engineer and principal administrator of the Division of Water Resources. With me is Micheline Fairbank, deputy administrator for the division. The Division of Water Resources is the state agency that has broad regulatory authority over all groundwater and surface waters of the state, with the exception of the Colorado River. We'll give a brief overview of how the division operates from a statewide perspective and some of the challenges that we face and what we're able to do about it. So our mission here is to responsibly manage Nevada's limited water resources in accordance with state law and the best available science. We deal with issues of water quantity, the amount of water that's available to divert and use, rather than water quality. The Division of Environmental Protection oversees water quality. And when I talk about water management here, what I'm primarily mean is through the administration of water rights. And our principal threshold of determining water availability and the potential for a use of water to conflict with another use. The division also has regular authority over the distribution of water under state decrees for rivers and streams, and we have regulatory authority over other issues such as well drilling and dam safety. Water belongs to the public, and every use of water, whether through a new appropriation or change of an existing appropriation, goes through our office for the review that it meets the statutory standard. There's a really well-developed and specific procedure for establishing and quantifying a water right and to be able to keep that water right in good standing. And water law is really good at that procedure. There's tens of thousands of active water right permits across the state. We process about 1,000 applications or change applications per year, and also about 1,000 changes in water right ownership per year. And we process about 6,000, or we receive about 6,000 requests for extensions of time, either per year, either to prevent forfeiture or to extend the proof of beneficial use of your water right. So as a division, we're really at capacity, just managing those foundational processes to serve water right holders. But increasingly, so the problems that we face are in managing the existing rights where there's either an assertion or a concern that there's not enough water to go around to meet all the existing commitments. And there's an expectation for the Division of Water Resources to be involved in finding a solution for that. And that's really made difficult because water is a public resource. It belongs to the public, but each individual water right is a protectable private property interest. So in this way, it's really different than a municipality which holds all the water rights for its customers. If you don't have a municipality like that, each water right is owned and held by the individual user. So this is a dilemma that water law is not as well suited to direct the state on how to resolve it in the long term. And we'll discuss this more as we go along. So now I'd like to provide just some broad statewide context on water resources. This is a map of average precipitation, with the reds being the driest areas of less than 8 inches or so per year. The oranges are somewhat wetter, and then the blues are over 40 inches per year. The average across the state is about 10 inches per year. This year, of course, we've greatly exceeded that, which is great, but especially in the last 20 years or so, most years are below average. So the median is less than the mean. And from a water management perspective, and this is something that I heard Tumwa say once that really stuck with me, is that we're always in a drought. We just have to always think that we're in a drought, occasionally punctuated by a big year, but for planning purposes, it's dry, and that's the natural state that we live in. So the outlines that you can see of the state of Nevada here are the administrative basins that are the framework for groundwater management across the state. And this shows the same delineation of those administrative basins. The basic rules of water rights and prior appropriation were established in the early part of the 20th century when the source of water supply was almost entirely surface water, diverted for irrigation needs, for smaller needs for mining, for domestic use and small municipal use. The technology to drill deeper wells and access groundwater for substantial use was developed later in the 20th century. So groundwater law then was established in 1939, which is generally considered to be ahead of its time and compared to most other Western states. But at that time, what our predecessors were able to do was to honor the existing law and find ways to adapt to the challenges that they were facing at that time with regard to groundwater. And one of the real initial questions was how do you know how much groundwater can be developed? With surface water, you can see it; it's either there or it's not. With groundwater, you can drill a well, you find water, you experience some drawdown. If so, how much is too much? So one of the practices that was initiated at that time was to delineate these administrative boundaries and identify areas of concentrated groundwater use, come up with a topographic delineation of these basins, and try to estimate what the water budget is based on the information that they had at the time. That's still how we administer water rights, groundwater rights. Starting in the 1940s and through the 1970s, we developed a series of reconnaissance estimates of groundwater basin scale availability, or the perennial yields. And what happened is, even at that time in the 70s, there was more groundwater rights appropriated than the estimated natural water budget could support. And today, about half of those groundwater basins are in that condition of having more commitments than the long-term average groundwater supply can support into the future. So now, where that is a problem and how severe that problem is really depends on the location and the circumstances in that area. In some locations, there are very acute problems. Some basins, we have, drawdown of 1 to 2 feet per year consistently. It's a little bit like Lake Mead, which you can see, but maybe at a smaller scale, or just it's happening underground, so it's not quite so evident. In other locations, we have appropriations may exceed the groundwater supply, but because of the scale or the hydrogeology, it could be decades or centuries before there's a real issue with not having enough. So this is a situation that we've all inherited. The question into the future is how to manage the water in such a way that we can live within our means in the long term, to protect senior rights, and to support the public interest through the contemporary needs for economic diversification, for protection of environmental values, and so on. DWR faces questions about this really frequently, but we're not really staffed or funded or really explicitly directed through statute to do it. However, we are taking steps that will point us in the right direction and set up our successors to be able to address this effectively into the future. It's really gradual, it can be very litigious and frustratingly slow, and the term that I heard that I like is that we're crossing the river by feeling the stones. I thought that really applied to how this is developing. So the more data that we get through drilling wells, through groundwater development and monitoring the impacts through hydrologic studies, the more we really understand about what that long-term groundwater supply is. So this figure is a map that shows general aquifer types. And by aquifer types, I mean just water-bearing rock types, which have different kinds of permeability, different storage capability, different connectivity with adjacent units. And this is just, I put this up as just one way to visualize what governs groundwater occurrence and movement in reality, besides just topographically delineated basins and a perennial yield. When addressing complex regional problems, in some areas we need to think of it as regional groundwater flow systems, that where groundwater crosses administrative boundaries. In some areas there are extremely deep wells or areas of concentrated pumping that can actually change the local hydrology of a system and can affect water availability, or that may have long-term impacts that we still don't understand, and we just have to keep monitoring and projecting to the best of our ability. So administratively, we operate with a pretty simple or straightforward concept of basins and perennial yield, and we need that to be able to do our jobs timely and respond to the public. And it's a really good starting point. It's easy to relate to, kind of like a checking account. You only have so much coming in, and you only have so much going out. And I use that, that's simple perspective often myself. But it's just really important to remember when we're really trying to deal with these complex regional groundwater issues, it can be inaccurate or misleading to oversimplify the natural setting. It's just important that we keep that in mind in order to be thorough in how we do this and protect senior rights and water users across the state.
Micheline Fairbank, Deputy Administrator, so I'm going to go ahead and carry on the presentation here. Next we're kind of transitioning to talking about some of the challenges and policies that govern the work that we do. And so within the statutory authority, we have certain tools that allow us to reduce commitments and to help manage shortages, but those are relatively limited. So, in terms of in terms of reducing commitments, we have the administrative tools of being able to cancel water rights for failure to fulfill their statutory obligations to perfect that right, meaning, doing the works of conversion, works of diversion, drilling the well, the, diversionary works, and then placing the water to beneficial use. But state law currently allows any number of extensions time, so long as that water right holder is demonstrating good faith and reasonable diligence to perfect that right. Other tools we have is forfeiture and abandonment of water rights. And those are more challenging tools for us to go ahead and exercise. Not only does it require a lot of time and capacity in terms of staff resources to go ahead and go through those processes, the statutory standard is a bit higher, and justifiably. But for forfeiture, we have, state law currently has it established that 5 successive years or more works a forfeiture. But procedurally, we have a lot of work on our end to determine whether or not the water has been used, whether it's been used in its entirety. Then we have certain noticing provisions. We have to provide notice and an opportunity for that water right holder to cure their deficiency, their non-use of water. So it's a very time intensive and staff resource intensive process. And then abandonment is even higher standard, where we have to go ahead and go through a lot of those same types of processes. But not only do we have to make a demonstration that that water hasn't been used, but the state engineer is also obligated to make a showing that there was an intent by the holder of that water right to abandon that water. And so it's a very challenging standard to go ahead and achieve. And we understand the basis for that. But those are the limited tools we have presently to go ahead and reduce commitments. But when we're having to manage shortages, the statutory processes are also very limited. We're directed to regulate by priority, or otherwise known as curtail by priority. And on a surface water system, that's very customary. If the water is available, it gets delivered to you. If you're in priority and you're senior, the water comes down the system to get to you, generally. And if you're junior and there's not enough water to go around, you don't get your delivery. The challenge, though, is in underground systems, curtailment by priority, you don't have the immediate acknowledgement and the immediate effect. It takes time for the effect of curtailment to be felt, as much as it takes time for the effect of overpumping to be discovered or determined. Another statutory tool we have is the designation of critical management areas. And presently, the law allows this, either users in a system or the state engineer to make a determination that if the water use is exceeding the available water supply, a critical management area can be ordered or designated. And what that does is it starts a 10-year clock. And it gives that community 10 years to develop a groundwater management plan that, to the satisfaction of the state engineer, will serve the purpose of reducing the conditions that created that, the basis for the designation of the critical management area. But in short, really, curtailment by priority is, a very draconian outcome. And it has significant impacts on the community and those people who are reliant on the water supply. And with the critical management areas, those can be a tool. But if the community doesn't come up with that groundwater management plan that the state engineer can find to be satisfactory, then after 10 years, again, we're back to regulation by priority or curtailment by priority. And so those are really the statutory structure that we're working within. But what we've discovered, particularly in the last several years, is that actions at the local level do make a significant difference. And so it's really a collaborative and cooperative effort between the Division of Water Resources and our local communities. And so we've seen these different types of things. You've seen two great examples already where we have conservation measures within our municipalities that are part of that process. How do we go ahead and deal with a tightening water supply and stretching our water budget farther? And so those are the different types of resources and interactions we have on the local level that we find are very effective and productive. Requiring dedication and over-dedication of water rights through county ordinances is another local tool that really does help work in collaboration with our office in helping to manage resources. One example of that is in the Pahrump Valley Basin. That particular community requires an over-dedication of 3-to-1 for new development. So you have to dedicate 3 times the amount of water that's anticipated to need to be used. And again, that's a way to go ahead and say, okay, we're going to go ahead and recognize the conditions and the realities on the ground, and we're going to go ahead and try to work within our means. Another example is voluntary reductions of irrigation use. In this last season, we saw a concerted effort by many of our users along the Walker River where they engaged in fallowing of certain fields to go ahead and voluntarily reduce the amount of water that they were using. They did deficit irrigation, they changed crop types, and so that type of community-based, local-based, water user-based activities does really work in concert and partnership with the efforts that we're trying to do. And those are our field by communication, engagement with those members of the public, those water users, and our office. And so we really do view it as that our role, the state is complementary to those other entities, those other external water users, to go ahead and carry out our water laws. So, some things that we are presently trying to do as an agency to build foundations for our long-term needs is, when we talk about those statutory tools that we have available to us, cancellations, forfeitures, abandonments, we've been told follow the law, and so we're going through and we're giving a thorough review of those different types of activities that come before us to assure that those are being done in conformity with the law. And so it does take additional staff time and resources, but that's what we're committed to doing, and that's what we are doing. We're also in the process of updating and revising the state water plan, which hasn't been done since 1999. It's a little bit overdue, it's warranted, and it's a really good effort. And what the Nevada State Water Plan, our statewide water plan, isn't intended to supplant local water planning, but to be complementary. And so that's what we're really diligently working on, is through our stakeholder engagement, working with our local entities to make sure that the Nevada State Water Plan is complementary and helps provide an overview and an overarching guidance, but that is helpful and useful to all. We're in the process of implementing the Nevada Water Resources Initiative, and so this is the use of a little over $6 million to fund updating our baseline science that we utilize for water budgets. And so this was funding that was directed to our agency from the ARPA funding sources. And so we've engaged in contracts with DRI and USGS to go ahead and begin that work. And so we're actively in the process of doing that. And then we're modernizing our processes and records management. And so one of those pieces is, again, we receive funding through ARPA to go ahead and digitize our records. It's going to be a long-term process, but then to ultimately make our records available on the internet. Excuse me. And so this is just kind of a reflection of what we're doing with USGS and DRI. And so then we're often asked about our water use. And so this just shows that our surface water use breakdowns, and then our statewide groundwater use. And so we're happy to go ahead and take any questions.
Thank you very much. We're going to do a couple of quick questions. Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. I just had a question about perennial yield. If you could just explain the purpose of perennial yield, who calculates it, and how often that calculation is updated.
Adam Sullivan for the record. Yeah, perennial yield is a concept that was developed in Nevada in the 40s or 50s when we were contemplating how to quantify the groundwater budget for a region. And in short, what it represents is the total amount of water that's fluxing through a defined area. So the amount that recharges in the mountains and the amount that naturally discharges through evaporation or through plant transpiration or through subsurface discharge out of the basin. And that's basically what that represents is the maximum amount of water that could be diverted for other uses indefinitely. So as I was saying, between the 1940s and the 1970s, there was a statewide effort to estimate perennial yield at a basin scale across the state. And in a lot of places, we still rely on those original numbers. In some locations, those numbers have been updated based on current science or a need or recognition that that initial reconnaissance number wasn't as accurate as it needed to be.
Can I just quickly, so can you just tell us, some of them obviously then are still in place from what you said, the 40s and 50s, but the ones that are updated, who updates that?
Adam Sullivan, for the record, the state engineer does. It's a tool that the state engineer uses for water management. It's not a standard in statute.
Thank you both for the presentation, and committee, I'll encourage you to reach out to the state engineer's office if you have any more questions, especially as we go on during session. So thank you for that. And with that, I think we'll close out the presentation and move on to our hearing on Assembly Bill 19, which revises provisions relating to water.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair Cohen, members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan. I am the state engineer and the administrator of the Nevada Division of Water Resources. I'm here to present Assembly Bill 19, which is a bill offered by the division. The intent of this bill is to assure that tribal communities and nations in Nevada are on equal footing with other governmental entities with respect to eligibility for grant funding through the Channel Clearance, Maintenance, Restoration, Surveying, and Monumenting Program, more commonly referred to as the Channel Clearance Program. This bill also seeks to afford officers and employees of federally recognized Indian tribes the ability to act as a water rights surveyor without possessing a professional engineering or land surveying license, which is the exact same allowance provided to officers and employees of the federal government. For the division, this is a straightforward bill that seeks to remove barriers for tribal nations. The bill simplifies processes and codifies policies of the division in law. Simply put, I believe this bill represents doing the right thing. There have been recent instances where tribal governments haven't had the same options that are available to other governmental entities. Now I'll walk through the specific changes in AB 19. Section 1 adds a new section to NRS Chapter 532, providing a definition for tribal government. Section 2 adds tribal governments as eligible recipients of grant funding under the Channel Clearance Program established in NRS 532-220. Section 3 makes further revisions to channel clearance funding provided for in NRS 532-230 in conformity with the changes set forth in Section 2. Section 4 revises NRS 533-080 by expanding the exemption in subsection 9 from the requirement to be a licensed professional engineer or professional land surveyor to officers and employees of a tribal government. This section also adds the definition of tribal government. Finally, Section 5 establishes the effective date of this legislation as July 1st, 2023. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to take any questions from the members of the committee.
Committee, do we have any questions? Okay, so I have a question, so I just want to make sure. So in this program, if there is any damage done to any property, the tribes would still have the same sovereign immunity that any of the state entities would have, any of the governmental entities would have.
Micheline Fairbank, Deputy Administrator. Thank you, Chair Cohen. So yes, the same immunities would apply in this particular instance, and so the tribal governments would have that same protections and protections from liability.
Thank you. Okay, Vice Chair Anderson.
Thank you. And this is spurred on by the chair's question. Is there a reason why it is not in effect as soon as it has been signed upon passage and signature then, as opposed to waiting until July 1st, based upon the fact then that it would allow them to have that, management earlier? So I'm just curious as to why it's July 1st for the enaction of the bill.
Micheline Fairbank, thank you. Without going back and looking at the BDR request, I don't recall whether or not it was requested to be upon passage and approval or July 1st. We're certainly open to it being, effective whenever, the legislature's pleasure. And so I don't have recollection as to whether or not that was a request on our part or a change through the drafting process.
All right, seeing no other questions, we will go to support. Is there anyone for support in Carson City? Please come forward, and if there's anyone in Las Vegas or Elko, please start to fill up the chairs. Please go ahead.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair, members of the committee. Jennifer Lanahan for the record. I'm here on behalf of the Reno Sparks Indian Colony. We just wanted to thank the division for bringing this bill forward, expanding the rights of the tribes, and we are here in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, seeing no one else. Oh.
Hello, everyone. Thank you. My name is Laurel Saito. I'm the Water Strategy Director for the Nature Conservancy. And the Nature Conservancy supports AB 19, allowing tribal communities to be eligible for the funds, can help them to be more resilient in the face of climate change. Thank you for the opportunity to express our support.
Thank you. Any other support? Okay, seeing no one else in Carson City, seeing no one in Elko or Las Vegas, BPS, if you could please go to the phones.
To testify in support of Assembly Bill 19, please press star 9 now on your phone to take your place in the queue. Caller, you are unmuted and may begin.
Good afternoon. This is Stacy Montus with the Nevada Indian Commission. I would like to extend my appreciation to Chair Leslie Cohen and the entire Assembly Natural Resources Committee for this consideration. Thanks also to State Water Engineer Adam Sullivan. This act, expanding the channeling clearance, maintenance, restoration, surveying, and monumenting program to include tribal governments in this state, as well as providing that officers and employees of tribal governments will be exempt from certain licensing requirements for state water rights surveyors, is supported by the Nevada Indian Commission. As the Executive Director of the Nevada Indian Commission for 3.5 years, My role is to be a conduit between our 28 federally recognized tribal nations and the state of Nevada. The addition of tribal governments to programs and services which are already in place, as is the intent of AB 19, makes complete sense. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. BPS, anyone else on the phones in support?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no more callers.
Thank you. Okay, so let's go to opposition in Carson City. Seeing none, anyone in Carson City, anyone in opposition in Las Vegas? Seeing none, anyone in opposition in Elko? Seeing none, anyone in opposition on the phones?
To testify in opposition of Assembly Bill 19, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers to testify in opposition.
Thank you. So we'll move to neutral in Carson City.
Hi, my name is Will Adler. I'm representing Silver State Government Relations, representing Pyramid Lake Paiute Tribe. We're actually in support of this issue, but I missed the support testimony just by a minute there. So I wanted to come in and give a late support neutral. This channel clearing funds and having access for tribal communities is clearly an oversight that is one that we're glad is being corrected today. So thank you very much and appreciate this bill. Bye.
We'll put you in support. Okay, so anyone in opposition in, I'm sorry, anyone in neutral in Carson City? Seeing none. Anyone in neutral in Elko? Seeing none. Anyone in neutral in Las Vegas? Seeing none. BPS, anyone on the phones in neutral?
Chair, the public lines are open and working, but we have no callers on the line.
Okay, seeing none, would the presenters like to come up and make a closing statement?
Adam Sullivan for the record. Thank you for the opportunity to hear the bill. I don't have anything to add at this time.
Thank you, Administrator. Okay, and with that, I will close out the hearing on Assembly Bill 19, and we're going to open the hearing on Assembly Bill 34. Assembly Bill 34 revises provisions related to water. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Adam Sullivan. I'm the state engineer, which serves as the administrator of the Division of Water Resources. I'm here to present Assembly Bill 34, which is a bill offered by the division. This bill addresses two distinct issues. The first is challenges related to publication of certain required notices. The second is the requirement that water right maps be submitted on certain materials. For the publication notices, the division seeks to amend the statutory language because of problems in assuring timely and complete publication as required by law. Under existing law, the division is required to publish certain notices in a newspaper of general circulation for a set interval and duration. However, the division has experienced with increased frequency, some newspapers either failing to complete the requested service, or more commonly to not confirm that the publication was indeed set within the set interval and for the required duration. Waiting for confirmation of newspaper publications is inefficient, causes unreasonable and avoidable delays, additional time and work, and may prejudice those affected by the publication. Division staff often expend significant time and resources to contact the newspapers to determine if the publication actually occurred as required by law, many times requiring multiple outreach efforts to secure a confirmation. Generally, this can be accomplished, but if it is determined that the required duration and/or frequency has not been satisfied, then the notice must be republished for the entire required duration and frequency. This results in delays in time, which impedes the division's ability to move forward with its administrative processes and impacts the public who are waiting for the division to act. The division is not requesting to eliminate newspaper publication. We recognize that many Nevadans may not have reliable internet access or other means to get public notices. However, in order to balance these needs with the practical constraints that we experience, the division is proposing to continue to submit all the same publications to the newspapers, but limit the reliance on the newspapers responding that a publication was completed as required by existing law, which is a step that we do not have any control over. The division also proposes an additional form of public noticing in a public location that would provide the same information as the newspaper. Incidentally, the information is also available on our website, and in practice, that's what most people rely on. We recognize that we may need to revise the language as proposed in AB 34, and we've been working with stakeholders and intend to propose an amendment as a result of those discussions in the coming weeks. As I walk through the bill, I'll address those areas of potential amendment. Section 1 revises the publication requirements relating to the annual notice required by the state engineer of the December 31st, 2027 deadline to submit claims of vested right. The revision in Section 1, subsection 2, changes the newspaper publication requirement from requiring that the notice must be published for 4 consecutive weeks to requiring the state engineers to submit for publication a notice to be made for 4 consecutive weeks. If the notice is not made in accordance with the law, but published at least once, the state engineer is not required to republish the notice. This section also adds a requirement that the state engineer mail the notice to a public library in each county to be posted, or if there is not a public library, it must be posted at another public location in the county. The division has been communicating with stakeholders to explore an alternative to the public library posting, as well as to the requirement to post at least once, and these provisions will likely be the subject of an amendment. Section 2 of the bill changes the term shall to must in subsection 2 and makes the same changes to the newspaper publication and public library posting provisions as set forth in section 1. Again, the state engineer is obligated to submit the notice for publication, assure the notice has been published at least once, and mail for public posting to the library in the county or counties of the affected stream system. Moving to section 3, this section simply removes the Mylar material requirement for an adjudication proceeding. Section 4 makes a conforming change. Section 5 makes the same revisions to the publication requirements. And as previously stated, the public library posting requirement is a subject of a future amendment. This section also revises the proofs the state engineer is required to submit to the court in conformity with changes to the publication requirements. Section 6 revises language for the notice the state engineer is required to prepare and adds the requirement that the notice establish a date on which the notice was mailed to the public library in the period the notice ends, which must not be less than 45 days after the date of mailing. Section 7 amends publication requirements for boards of county commissioners to conform to the same requirements of the state engineer. This section 2 is the likely subject of an amendment. Section 8 modifies the starting date of the protest period for a water right application from 30 days from the date of the last publication to 30 days from the date established in the notice described in section 6. So this would have an added benefit as we see it to the public by providing advance notice of when exactly the protest period begins and ends, rather than relying on confirmation from the newspaper of the final publication date. Section 9 makes conforming changes to publication requirements to match the revisions made in Section 7 of the bill. Section 10 removes the tracing linen material requirement for certain maps submitted to the division. Section 11 removes the Mylar material requirement from fee schedule for colored plots. Section 12 and 13 make similar changes to the publication and library posting provisions consistent with prior revisions, and these changes too are encompassed in the language for proposed amendment. Finally, Section 13 includes conforming changes. Thank you for your attention, and I'm happy to answer any questions from the committee.
Thank you for the presentation. I have a question from Assembly Member Bilbray Axelrod.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I understand the want and desire, and I know we have this idea that perhaps our traditional ways of getting that news out to people is not the best way anymore. I just worry with something like this that it might be best to do this plus this. I don't know if you currently have anything right now on your website, but I've been on your website and I can't find anything. Maybe that's because it's not there, but I certainly don't find it super user-friendly to find information. So that would be my concern, is that we have people in Nevada who have been looking at the same thing the same way for a long time, and I just am a little bit worried that we might be pulling the rug out from under them a little quickly. But my question really is, are there currently, should I be able to find something on your website right now, or is there just not any notices?
The information is on the website. We get mixed reviews about the website. Some people love it and tell us never change it. Some people say it needs to be completely overhauled. In response to that, we are in the process of modifying our website in ways that we think serves the public as best as possible and still gives people access to the archives of records that are available. We aren't seeking to change how we notify the public. We will still send these notices to the newspapers, and we also want to send a notice to the county to publish in an additional way. The significant change that we seek here is the problem that we experience waiting for a newspaper to respond to us, to confirming that a certain publication was made before we can proceed with other water right administrative processes. So I understand your point, and I entirely recognize the importance of making publicly available options to review applications before our office, and I do not intend on undermining that.
So you did raise an issue. So have there been instances where your office did what you were supposed to do, and you sent everything to the newspaper, and you thought publication was happening, only to find out that the newspaper did not publish, despite you sending what was supposed to be sent, the payments, the information, and the publication did not occur?
Micheline Fairbank for the record. The short answer is yes. The more comprehensive answer is yes. We've had instances where we have sent a publication notice that's supposed to occur for 4 consecutive weeks. happens week 1, week 2, week 3 got skipped, week 4 happened. So then we had to go back to step 1 and republish again for 4 consecutive weeks. So now we're pushed an entire period of time out. We have instances on multiple occasions, because many of our newspapers are owned and operated by the same larger organization, where we will send publication notice to be printed in one newspaper, and it gets printed and published in another newspaper. And we don't find out about that until after the fact, because not every newspaper will send us a proof copy to approve before it gets published. And so then when we get an affidavit back, it says this newspaper instead of the newspaper it was supposed to be published in. So again, then we have to go back and republish again in the correct newspaper of circulation. There's, I mean, in all fairness, it's a difficult trade. We're all dealing with, staffing shortages and challenges, but we are seeing increasing occurrences where we're having these different challenges. And so what we're trying to do is find that happy median of making sure that we're able to continue to proceed with our business and do things in a way that still is transparent, but also then doesn't behold our office and the public to actions that we don't have any control over.
Assemblymember DeLong.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm glad to see you're keeping the newspaper publications in the regulations or in the statute. But I completely understand not wanting to rely on the publications, but just the division sending the notice. You did mention that you're planning on amendments to the statute to deal with more public noticing, but you didn't mention what they are, so I'm going to suggest a couple. One would be getting it posted at the courthouse in the county or counties, and the other would be at one or more post offices, depending on the location. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I may, we're absolutely open to suggestions. We borrowed the library posting was borrowing a prior procedure, but we didn't believe that that was going to be the panacea of it all. So we're open to those types of suggestions, and thank you.
Assemblymember Brown May.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. So I'm kind of on the same sort of concerns relative to how we're communicating, but I think I'm coming at it from a different direction, right? Because of the decline in newspaper circulation across the country. Are we still accessing newspapers to the same degree so that people really are receiving the information that's so pertinent to them? So I'm a little concerned that we're relegated to just that newspaper, and would like to see, like my colleague, and more, right? One of the ways that I receive information is through a listserv when I sign up for pieces or subject matters that are important to me, and I'm curious to know if you've considered perhaps managing a list of interested parties as another way to communicate outside of our public postings.
We do use, Adam Sullivan for the record, we do use listservs for some procedures, some processes to keep interested public notified, particularly where there's a subject matter regionally that we're trying to address that takes a long period of time and has a number of different stakeholders that we want to keep updated. On this particular issue, we have talked about that. There's some challenges with hitting the right target audience because like I said in my presentation earlier, we receive about 1,000 applications per year, and there's a number of other subject matter that needs to be publicly noticed. So the challenge is capturing the right audience who is, without sending everyone on the listserv multiple emails every day or something like that. So I don't have the perfect solution, but that has been one of the topics that's come up as we've talked with stakeholders about alternatives and trying to target, the people in that area that would be interested or potentially concerned about something that's presented with us.
Assemblymember LaRue Hatch.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this. I agree that we need to update, I think especially with the decline in rural publications and the infrequency with reporting. I also agree, I don't know that many people are getting all of their news from the newspaper anymore, right? So I appreciate wanting to be innovative. I wonder though, is it possible, and understanding you have 1,000 applications a year, maybe it's not, but is it possible to mail a notice to the people that would be impacted by this, so that you're just targeting specifically this small group, but giving them that direct notice?
Thank you for the question, Micheline Fairbank. We certainly are willing to provide whatever notice the legislature, directs us to do, and we're happy, and we do believe that public notice is an integral part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. The challenge with doing a mailing is it would depend on the locality and the cost. And so, certainly if we have a change application in the center of the Las Vegas basin and we're sending it to all potentially affected water right owners, that could be a lot of people. Or, it could be not very many. It just depends on the location. So there would be a cost associated with that. And so then who ultimately is the one to bear the responsibility for that additional expense? I know that, for approximately, if we're sending one mailing out, we did calculate the fiscal impact of this particular legislation on our agency, and based upon the average number of applications filed a year, we're looking at about a $750 per year fiscal impact, which isn't significant. That's something we can absorb. But if you take that 63 cents or whatever, the 65 cents per a mailing, and multiply that out to all the water right owners in a basin or in a flow system, that certainly could add up. But if that's what we're directed to do, then we will certainly do it.
Assemblymember Hanson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm not as worried about the noticing. I've said it a million times, I have 5 counties that are rural. And newspapers are big for them. They're rural, the constituents base that I'm in communication with are pretty reliant on newspaper because internet connections are not that great, and a lot of them aren't real comfortable with email. So I think as I'm looking, we talk about 4 times in the publication, and I get your hiccup with that. Maybe they missed 3. I think that's completely reasonable. You attempted, the newspaper drops the ball. You shouldn't be punished with a timeline because they dropped the ball. I'm fine with that. And then you say at least one public library, and if there's not a library, it would go to another public place, which maybe was suggested as the courthouse or the post office. I think we're covering it there. And then a suggestion was we might need to tweak the website. You already publish on the website, maybe making that more comfortable. And then listserv was mentioned, social media, maybe perhaps if you have a Twitter account or a Facebook account or whatever, I think we cover it. For those who are more inclined to use electronics, we've got it covered. For those who are more inclined to the newspaper or print media, we have it covered. So from my perspective, I feel that that's a reasonable ask with maybe adding the additional suggestions here today to a means of getting it out there. So thank you. That wasn't a question.
Assemblymember Watts.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you so much for the presentation. I have, a brief remark. First of all, I've spoken with you about this proposal before. I think it's gotten out, and I think it's kind of been noted by the remarks from my colleague and I think others as well. And I just want to make sure that it's clear that the discussion really is about trying to enhance public noticing, and so that's why there's been an addition of other ways of ensuring that this information gets out, while also addressing some of the issues that you've encountered with newspaper publication. And I appreciate you sharing what some of those are. And I know that we're probably about to hear some opposition, and I'm also really glad to hear that you're going to be working with the different stakeholders to try and address those concerns. The only comment that I'd have on this piece is, when you're talking about some of those examples, I think there's also some heartburn on that. Ultimately, there may only be one publication instead of four, and hearing some of those examples, maybe there's some additional issues with that consecutive piece that might be something that could be looked at. And while we're brainstorming ideas, I just wanted to put those up for consideration. I did have a question though, and that is, in section 8, and you discussed the changes, I think in sub 1, or from within 30 days after the date of last publication to this new language. And I was just wondering if you can explain in practice what that looks like for the for how the window would change, so that we can understand if that's moving it up, moving it back. That'd be really helpful.
Thank you for the question, Micheline Fairbank. So the intent is to not shorten the duration of time that protests are allowed to be submitted to the state engineer's office. The idea is to expand that time, or to try to allow for at least the same amount of time, if not more, but by when the posting is and the notice is issued, that then there's that duration of time that is set out in that notice, saying that this is that deadline, this is that hard and fast date. And so for us, it was, presently everything's dependent on once publication is complete, which we've talked about can be uncertain. So this provides that certainty of this is the starting point, this is the ending point. And so everybody has clear timeframes in which to operate. Those were, kind of our most reasonable estimates. Again, we're not married to any particular component of this as being, that's not the hill we're going to die on, in the sense of if somebody wants it to be a slightly larger, expanded period of time, we're open to those considerations. But really the idea was just to have that level of certainty, so we know when we can move an application to ready for action status or ready for action protested status, and get our processes moving that aren't dependent on that uncertain date that sometimes is a moving target with us.
Thank you, and I'll just say I look forward to seeing what comes out of the ongoing conversations.
I think most of the committee members have asked my questions. Just so that we have a record of this, no one seems to care about the materials of the maps, but do you want to really briefly tell us what's going on with the maps and why you want to change the materials?
Historically, water right maps have been prepared on Mylar. It's a really durable material. And it works for water right maps. There's one mention of it in statute in the adjudications portion that says that maps must be submitted on Mylar. This is especially targeted by the upcoming deadline to submit any new claims of vested right by December 31st, 2027. If those maps are required to be printed on Mylar, it could be potentially a lot. And in practice, what happens is the person submitting the information is preparing the map on their computer in AutoCAD or in some kind of a software. They print it out on Mylar, hand deliver it to our office. We review it and then scan it, and then we have this scanned image of the map, which is the map that most people refer to, and sometimes it just loses quality. And, you know, going forward, we're investigating the procedure to be able to just have people submit maps digitally and skip that whole process and still be able to preserve that as an original document. We're not there yet, but this is one step to remove a barrier and just remove the requirement that maps be submitted on Mylar. With the mention of tracing linen, that is just very archaic, and we haven't seen a tracing linen map for probably 100 years.
Okay,
So it's just a cleanup measure.
All right. Seeing no other questions, we are going to move to support. So anyone in Carson City in support, I'll just remind the room that it's support as the bill is drafted. Anyone in support? Please come forward. With, I guess with, we don't quite have a conceptual amendment, but please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chauncey Chowdhuang with the Southern Nevada Water Authority. We are in support of this bill. We believe this bill seeks to strive for efficiency and modernization for the State Engineer's Office, so that's why we are in support. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone in Las Vegas in support? Okay, seeing no one. Anyone in Elko? Seeing no one, we'll go to the phones. Anyone in support on the phones, BPS?
Chair, the public line is open and working, but there are no callers to provide testimony. Sorry, in support, yes.
Thank you. Then we will move to opposition, and anyone in opposition can come up and start to fill out the chairs. And please go ahead when you're ready.
Good evening, everyone, and members of the committee, Madam Chair. My name is Thomas Morley. I represent the Nevada Press Association, and we are currently opposed at this point. We are currently working with the proponents of the bill to fix our issue, and thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for letting us know that you're working with the bill presenters. Please go ahead.
Good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Steve Walker for the record. I'm representing Eureka County. Eureka County, most residents of Eureka County only know of water-related notices through the newspaper. Yet Eureka County would seek an amendment to the bill, would be working with county clerks to post in all locations that Board of County Commission meetings are posted, other notices, and include it into the county website. And so we can expand it. That's just... If, with that amendment, Eureka County would not oppose the bill. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Please go ahead when you're ready.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, this is Kyle Roerink, Executive Director of the Great Basin Water Network. We're not opposed to the intent, but rather the proposed solution here. I think the cart is definitely before the horse here, and I think we've all recognized that. It's important to consider, why are we even talking about this? We're talking about, why are these published? Well, someone wants to drill a new well. Someone wants to appropriate large quantities of water. Someone wants to move large quantities of water around. A number of reasons, changing points of diversion. This could have impact on people's property rights here. And I think what we haven't talked about today is due process. And that's something that is very important in the consideration of all this. And so while we're here talking about newspapers not doing well in rural areas, we should be talking about private property rights as well, and what this really means big picture. So doing this right, I think, is extremely important for this body. And also, as a former newspaper man, I believe that on the sliding scale of transparency, we need to be doing things where we have more transparency, not not less transparency, not trading off a guarantee of 4 publications in a newspaper for 1 publication and then a promise to post things on cork boards. So, this is a challenge. I'm going to continue to work with the state on this and understand the need for modernization, but these are really serious issues, and I appreciate your time and consideration. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Patrick Donnelly, Great Basin Director at the Center for Biological Diversity. We're opposed to this bill in its current form. You all should have received a letter today with opposition from several environmental groups, as well as the Nevada Open Government Coalition, which is a group of entities concerned with open government access and transparency in Nevada. They've all agreed that this bill is not acceptable in its current form, primarily because it subverts the current process of posting and notice. People do read newspapers in rural Nevada. In fact, it's really the main conduit of information for many in rural Nevada. The alternative is me and my job. I go on the state engineer's website once every 2 weeks, and I scour every single application across the whole state to see what might be relevant. I get paid to do that. The concern here is not, is it easy for Patrick Donnelly to access water rights applications? The concern is it easy for rural citizens to access this information? And in many cases, rural citizens are the eyes and ears of my organization, Kyle's organization, and Mr. Fontaine's organization, and others. The eyes and ears are those rural residents reading those newspapers. And so it really isn't just an academic point. It really is quite important for the transparency of government. And to answer Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod's question about the website, it is extremely difficult to access that information on the website. There is no section of the website that says, hear ye, here is a water rights application you need to be concerned with. You need to scour a database to find that information. And so, there's elements of this bill I think that are good as far as clarity on protest deadlines and so forth, and map materials. I think there's discussions to be had about how to best notice the public about water rights applications, but it seems to us that maintaining 4 publications in the newspaper is very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Please go ahead, sir.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Jeff Fontaine, and I serve as Executive Director of both the Central Nevada Regional Water Authority and Humboldt River Basin Water Authority. Both are opposed to AB 34 as written. We certainly appreciate the Division of Water Resources difficulty, but AB 34 definitely diminishes the public notification process that's been in effect for decades, and many people rely on that process. So we just are here to make sure that the public interest is served and that all domestic well owners, farmers, ranchers, municipalities, and businesses are provided the timely notification that they are entitled to so they can protect their water rights from potential harm. There are many other state agencies and local governments that have similar requirements for consecutive notification in newspapers. And so I think there are some examples out there that we can work with the division on to try to address this issue. And many of the suggestions or thoughts that we had about how we can enhance this process, including for sure the website, which as Assemblywoman Bilbray Axelrod pointed to, is not user-friendly at all, even for people like myself and others who are paid to monitor water right applications that are submitted to the state engineer's office. It's not an easy task, and certainly not so much for the public. And so posting in multiple locations has been brought up, and also the discussion about mailing letters to affected or potentially affected water right holders. The division already has that responsibility in statute to notify owners of domestic wells within a certain distance of proposed large municipal or industrial wells, so possibly that can be expanded as well. So we are committed to working with the division. We believe we share the same objective, and so we're certainly on board to keep the conversation going. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else in opposition in Carson City? Seeing none. Anyone in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Anyone in Elko? Seeing none. BPS, please go to the phones.
Chair, we still have no callers to provide testimony.
Thank you. Anyone in neutral in Carson City? Okay, seeing none. Anyone in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Anyone in Elko? Seeing none. BPS one last time. Anyone in neutral on the phones?
There's still no callers on the line, Chair.
Okay, thank you. I certainly appreciate it. Sounds like that there are constructive negotiations going on. Administrator, would you like to make a closing statement? You don't have to.
Adam Sullivan for the record. Thank you for your consideration. We will continue working with different stakeholders on improving this bill. We in no way intend to diminish due process or notification of the public. We're just trying to improve processes and add government efficiency. Thank you.
Thank you for that. With that, I will bring our hearing on AB 34 to a close, and we will move on to public comment. As a reminder, public comment is limited to 2 minutes per person. BPS, is there anyone in person who would like to make public comment? Okay, seeing none. Anyone in Las Vegas? Seeing none. Anyone in Elko? Seeing none. BPS, anyone on the phones?
The
Okay.
public lines are open and working, and we have no callers.
All right. Anyone on the committee, anything? Okay, then thank you. I will conclude this hearing. Thank you all very much.